Hi, my name is Brittany Howard, and today I'm going to present an informative speech regarding the Freedom Summer of 1964. When you are not in Mississippi, it's not real, and when you're in the rest of the world, it's not real. The events that occurred in Mississippi during the 1960s were surreal. Citizens were severely hurt, humiliated, and even lynched just because of their skin color. My purpose of this speech is to inform you about the horrifying and positive events that happened during the Freedom Summer and how they affected our future. Today I'm going to talk about Robert Moses, the creator of the Freedom Summer, the living conditions for African Americans in Mississippi, and the Freedom Summer itself. All throughout history, there are many people that make an impact to an event. Robert Moses impacted the civil rights movement because he was the founder of the Freedom Summer. Robert Moses was a Harvard grad student, an activist, and an African American himself. He created the Freedom Summer, and he suggested that Mississippi creates the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, also known as MFDP. MFDP sought recognition as the representative delegation from Mississippi at the Democratic National Convention of 1964. This was stated in Stanford's article regarding Robert Moses. The living conditions and treatment for the African Americans in Mississippi were unbelievable, as in everywhere else in America during the 1960s, but Mississippi was remarkably worse. Any pursuit that an African American took to vote always ended in a threat of his or her life and humiliation, but most of the time they were lynched. Most African Americans that were brave enough to register to vote, never passed the literacy test because all literacy tests were done by white Americans, and whether they actually passed the literacy test or not didn't matter because the white Americans never passed the African Americans because of their race. The living conditions in Mississippi for African Americans were terrible. Most African Americans lived in poverty, and then the few lucky ones that could afford property still were unable to vote. Everything that happened during the 1960s resulted in the Freedom Summer. Again, the Freedom Summer was created by Robert Moses, but not a lot of people know he was partnered with Martin Luther King Jr. and a lot of college white volunteers, and they formed the MFDP. They set out to help the African Americans of Mississippi. Their goals were to get everybody that was eligible to vote, and to create the Freedom Clinics and the Freedom Schools to help make life more durable in Mississippi for them. The Freedom Clinics, stated in Lisa Cozen's article, Mississippi and the Freedom Summer, stated that they replaced non-existent health care and assisted legal disputes. As an African American, especially in Mississippi, anything they did resulted going to jail. There was a lot of bailing outs and a lot of disputes. And so these freedom clinics helped the ones that couldn't afford a lawyer to have somebody represent them. One of the most important things that came out of the Freedom Summer were the Freedom Schools. This taught illiterate African Americans how to read, and they were also taught by volunteers, which were the college students. There were negative outcomes to the Freedom Summer, of course, and sadly there were 4 deaths, 80 beaten, 1,000 arrested, and 67 important buildings bombed, causing deaths. A specific case that I read about were the murders of Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner. They were all volunteers of the Freedom Summer. After the KKK noticed that they helped out a group of African Americans and that they were part of the Freedom Summer, they pulled them over for speeding violations. And after they posted bail, the KKK hunted them down, murdered them, and buried them in a dam in Mississippi. There were a lot of good things that did come out of the Freedom Summer, excluding the tragic ends to these young people's lives. A good positive outcome that came out of the Freedom Summer was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This gave African Americans a fair chance to vote. But without Robert Moses, Martin Luther King Jr., and MDFP for creating the Freedom Summer, Mississippi would not be the same as it is today. The living conditions, of course, have bettered than they were before, and more African Americans have better opportunities, of course, than they did in the 60s. But sad to say, racism isn't completely resolved. I hope in the future that it will be completely gone. Thanks.